Everybody, welcome to our webinar. We'll start in about 1 minute. Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is part 2 of our CANA Working Virtually webinar series. We understand that we are in challenging times right now where many organizations are being required to figure out how to work virtually, remotely, and still accomplish their organizational missions. We're really glad that you're part of today's conversation, and we hope that you get out of a lot out of today's session. We do anticipate some questions from you. So if you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A chat thread, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. You can also ask those in the normal chat thread. When CANA Advisors started in 2008, our leadership made a conscious decision that our organization would be a virtual organization to support other organizations in how they analyze, assess, and execute to make decisions. So you might say that working virtually has been built into our DNA. We're happy that we can share some important points on what makes working virtually work for us. Our agenda today facilitates questions and answers with our panelists of CANA clients and partners. And so today's session is going to focus on helping, extending CANA Advisors to hear about how our clients and partners deal with working virtually, what works well for them, what challenges they face, and how they work around those. Last week's webinar focused on how CANA works internally, and you can always find that webinar, the recording for that webinar on our website. So you can just go there and find that and see that video if you want to recap. So today's agenda will focus on our panelists, and we will ask them some questions. First, I'll introduce them. Then we will ask them a couple questions, and then we'll field questions from you, from the audience. We'll read those questions. I'll read those questions to the panelists, and then they'll be able to respond. First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists and each of our panelists for spending time with us, sharing your insights into how you work virtually, your challenges, and your workarounds. So once again, enter any questions in the chat room or in our Q&A session, and we'll make sure that we ask some of those questions throughout. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists, and once again, we have 2 of our CANA clients that joined us today, and we also have 2 of our partners. So first up, I'd like to introduce Chris Rietter. He's a principal and co-founder at Recon Insight. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hey, Norm. Hey, thanks for having us on today. This is really exciting. We're excited to share what we do for remote work. Yeah, so my name is Chris Rietter. Like Norm said, I have been in the software business for 25 years, more than 25 years. And for my background, I've done a lot of time working on a lot of different industries. And 15 years ago, we started a company called Recon Insight. So I'm the co-founder of that company. We have a baseline of about 5 employees, all working remotely from day one of our company. And we grow and shrink based on our projects. So we may have up to 10 or 15 people on a project. We create software for businesses. So we develop that computer software and we deliver it to our customers, which are businesses typically. And then we spend a lot of time performing professional services to help them. So we do this all remotely. And a key point I like to get out about how to work virtually, that we work virtually in our organization, is that we find that we get away from the punching the clock mentality where you're working by work is a unit of hour, I guess you could say, or unit of work is based on an hour. We try to get towards a results-oriented environment where instead of punching the clock 8 to 5, 8 to 9, or so on, 8 to 5, 9 to 5. We get into this results-oriented where tasks get done. That means maybe the people only work 6 hours versus 8 hours. But yeah, that's the big thing that kind of we push forward in terms of an overall approach to working virtual. So thanks, Norm. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks again, Chris, for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce our second panelist. Our second panelist is Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Newell from the Marine Corps, Installation Next. And so I'll turn over to Brandon to introduce himself.
All right, thanks, Norm. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm excited to share what we've learned and learned in some ways, but through working with Norm on the projects that we have today. So I'm the Director of Technology and Partnerships for a program called Installation Next for the Marine Corps. in layman's terms, that means smart cities for bases. My job is to create collaborative partnerships on emerging technology, such as Verizon and 5G, connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles with Qualcomm, drone traffic management with the FAA, counter intrusion with Customs and Border Protection. And we're able to partner with them, both industry and other agencies, to better understand how emerging technology is disrupting and what our use cases would be, both on installations and on the battlefield in the future. And so I have many different projects, many different collaborations all across the nation. I'm sitting at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in San Diego right now, where I hang my hat mostly. But this is largely a virtual job. And you could think of a team of teams model where I'm constantly leading different projects with different partners, almost in kind of this part-time role for everyone as we all row to a common vision. So I'm excited to share some of the things that we've learned about how to execute in a virtual environment and have everyone row in the same direction, and learn from the other panelists on how they're doing it as well. So pleasure to be here. I'm excited for the hour.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Next, I'd like to introduce one of our partners, Sean Charchin. He's an operations research analyst from Group W.
Hey, hello, Norm. Hello, everybody. As Norm said, I'm an operations research analyst working for a company called Group W. Group W was founded in 2006, primarily an operations research company. It's employee-owned, about 96 employees, hovers in the high 90s. And we have a cadre of operations research analysts, model software developers, and then what we call hybrid analysts / developers, people who can build one-off tools. And so we build small tools that are like logistics tools, as similar to the ones that we're using for the field ops project that Norm and Brandon and I are collaborating on. And then bigger tools, if you've heard of Storm. So that model's inception was about 20 years ago. It's about 1.6 million lines of code, big campaign analysis tool, and do a lot of good work with that across the DoD. So for my contribution here, thinking about key points and what to share, I probably bring a unique perspective because I'm one of the first people to institute or to execute remote working within Group W. We had a database developer and an ops research analyst, but I'm sort of the first person to do anything from a managerial role. So I'll be sharing my experiences with you guys, and I wove in some of my responses into the questions that we'll be answering in a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Next, I'd like to introduce another one of our clients, and I'd like to introduce Aaron Friedman. He's a strategic category manager for transportation at Freeport-McMoRan.
Thank you, Norm. Appreciate you having me. Again, my name is Aaron Friedman. As Norm said, I'm a category manager of logistics and transportation at Freeport-McMoRan. We are one of the world's largest copper and molybdenum producers. And we've always managed transportation centrally. So we've got many mine sites globally, and a number of them in the desert southwest of the United States, as well as in Colorado that our team manages. And so while we haven't worked virtually, we've worked remotely in the sense that all of our trucks and all of our operations are going on at the site on a daily level, and we're managing the carriers, those relationships with the carriers, allocations with carriers, from a centralized location here in Phoenix, Arizona. So, working virtually is newer for our team. About a year ago, we started doing a work from home twice a month. And so our team's had a little bit of practice in this. We haven't all done it at the same time on the same day, certainly not at weeks at a time. So it's a little bit new from that perspective, but we're getting along quite well so far. I've been at Freeport for about 3 years now, and prior to that, I was with a large Fortune 500 logistics company named Expeditors International for about 6.5 years. So I have been in the whole corporate Fortune 500 world for a while, and I would say that corporate America is a little bit behind on the virtual work. So I'm hoping that coming out of this, they have a new perspective on that, and I think they certainly will. So thanks. I'm happy to be here, Norm.
Thank you, Aaron. Once again, thanks to the panelists for being here. We're going to roll into a couple questions, and this is to, get things moving. And what I'd ask everybody to do, if you're an attendee and you have questions, please ask your questions in our Q&A chat thread. We'll tee up your questions to ask the panelists after these first two questions. So now's a good time to start asking. So my first question for the panelists, and this will go first to Chris Rietter, is what is the biggest challenge that you or your organization is having now, considering the current situation and your team working from home? And how are you resolving this?
Yeah, this is a good question. So like I said earlier, we've been working fully remote for 15 years. So it's nothing new to us per se, but there are kind of unexpected challenges that have come up. And for a couple of my people, and we didn't, like I said, we didn't expect it. But when you think about working from home all the time for years and years, you kind of get into a rhythm where you have an outlet every day. You might escape for a coffee. You may escape for a trip to pick up cleaning or go do some errands. And you really rely on that as a full-time remote person or virtual or distributed worker. And now that's no longer available to everybody. So now we feel a little more trapped than usual. And again, it's a little nuanced because we already work from home, and it doesn't happen to everybody, but a couple of my people have really had troubles with that. They don't have that release that they really depend upon because they are at home all the time. The way they've gotten through this is pretty simple. After a week or two, we're in week 4 here in Colorado. After a week or two, they just figured they went for walks with their family at least 2 or 3 times a day. And that, got them away from the desk, got them out of the house, and it kind of scratched that itch they had for getting away from the house and interacting with someone else. So that's that, Norm.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Brandon, I'll ask the same question to you. Let me know if you need me to repeat the question.
All right, thanks, Norm. Yeah, I want to focus on 2 different areas. One's a personal area about how it's impacting me and my performance, and then another is a programmatic look at this and the impact. So first off, my job is generally virtual most of the time anyway. I could work from home, but I can focus better in where I'm sitting now, which is basically a conference room that I call my office on the base. It gets me away from home, gets me away from those other roles and the distractions that are there. So most days I'm actually working from home now, and I've had to scale back my expectation of what I can focus on and productivity. But I'm trying to revel in the fact that I'm having more time with my kids and my wife, and we can get more projects done, And so taking advantage of the disruption for everyone else that's having a greater impact on how they, work through their own kind of chaos, and not setting this expectation of performance that may have been set in a different environment, and just being okay with the way things are. The second thing is programmatically. So as was mentioned, Norm and Sean work on a program with me around unmanned logistics systems. We had a major event in June we were going to hold with demonstrations and design think, and we're going to have multiple companies come out and show their capabilities, and we're going to show it off and create a new vision of the future through that event. And we are walking through right now this what we call courses of action. Should we turn that into a virtual event and some of the frictions of not having pulled off one of those before? Or should we delay all the way until October when we have some comfort level that, things will be settled and asset availability and everyone's time to kind of plan, logistics for themselves. And so we are working through the trade-offs of those two. The virtual event allows us to maintain our timelines and our deliverables across the program for the next 2 years. And so it's very clearly the benefit, but as the leader of the program, there is a risk that I feel in how do you hold a design think session online with people all over? How do you show demonstrations from, 10 different companies in-house, as they show their capabilities, and who's going to orchestrate that wheel as it turns? And so we're working with Norm now to try and, paint a picture for how that will work and, lessen the risk that I feel in making that call. But we know programmatically it's much better if we do this event still. on our timeline. And so, yeah, I hope that's helpful for people, and we'll see how we turn out.
Great. To be determined. Thanks, Brandon. Okay, next I'd like to turn over to Sean to answer the question.
Sure. So like I said before, I was one of the first people in our company to start working remotely. And because of that, there was some pain associated with me working remotely and my colleagues not. And now that basically everyone's working remotely, I'm able to share some of my experiences and lessons learned, et cetera. And what I realized is that what people are experiencing right now, our company did a great job of getting out ahead of things, helping people to understand, paint by numbers, what to do if they get sick, what their benefits are, PTO, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that was sent out via email. And what I proposed to our CEO was that we hold sort of a town hall meeting where we can address people's personal questions, because questions beget questions. And once you get people talking, they're going to open up and start to express some of the concerns that perhaps aren't being addressed, via email. And there's a lot of people out there that are in our company who potentially haven't seen one of their colleagues' faces in the last couple of weeks. So this is just an opportunity. I'm organizing the town hall. I might MC it or host it. We'll see. It gives our CEO an opportunity to come in sort of like from the side, from a position of strength, and address the company, personally with, via VTC. So that's what we're doing. That's what I'm trying to manage within the company.
Great, thanks, Sean. Aaron, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I think, by nature, humans are creatures of habit, right? We get up in the morning, we like to maybe go to our favorite coffee shop in the morning, get into the office, you have a general routine there. Maybe at the end of the day, you leave around the same time. A couple days a week, I like to head straight to the gym before I head home for dinner. And so I think anytime you disrupt that natural flow of your daily life, you're going to have some natural stress with that and uncertainty. And we're seeing that with our team a little bit. But over time, you settle into this new norm. Now I'm waking up. I still actually go to the same place I like to for coffee because it's still open right now. I come right back home, do my work, and at the end of the day, my workout is now in the garage, my makeshift gym temporarily here while the gym's closed. So, again, it felt weird at first, and now it's become normal. And so I think, people just have to give it a chance, take a deep breath, relax a little bit. And I think the nerves settle down and work is really no different. Now, the hardest thing I'd say for our group, we are in logistics and transportation, so things change by the hour, sometimes by the minute, and a lot of issues come up that you need to address immediately. And sometimes those issues involve multiple people from your team. You got to be able to have that discussion. So it was very easy for me previously to walk out of my office and say, hey, you come here, let's have a discussion, let's get this figured out. It can be a little different virtually, right? So now it's just, how do we use the tools that we have? We've always had these great tools. You can instant message people, you can video chat people, you can do all this. And so it's turned into, start a quick group chat and say, hey, we all need to hop on a video real quick and discuss this issue. And we've been able to do that pretty well. So again, I think that's been the hardest thing, is just not being able to walk out and immediately talk to the person you may need to solve an issue. But over time, you learn to adapt, and I've been very pleased with the way our team's handling it this far. So I think that's my answer.
Thanks, Aaron.
Sorry if I was a little long-winded there, Norm.
Not at all. No, that was great. That was really good. Thanks, everybody, for answering that first question. So that was like our warm-up round. Now we get to the really hard questions, right? Just to remind the audience, hey, feel free. We see questions now coming into our Q&A chat thread. We have 4 or 5 of them in there so far. You also have the opportunity to like certain questions. So if you see someone's question in the chat thread, and if you want to vote for that one, you can click the thumbs up icon, and that'll kind of launch it towards the top, and that will help us in prioritizing the questions we ask the panelists when we get to your questions. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so let's go to our second question for the panelists, and we'll go down the line the same way again. So our next question focuses on collaboration. So how do you make collaboration work internally and externally in this new environment?
Yeah, this is the biggest challenge, right? We're spread across the country or around the world. How do you stay in touch with our own people as well as our clients? And of course, that's a major challenge. So of course, before this happened with the lockdown, we would, even though we're a remote company, would make big efforts to visit our clients, hopefully once a year. Hopefully we see them more often if they go to the same trade shows. So even though we're remote, we do go out of our way to make contact with partners and clients. In terms of the nuts and bolts day to day, we always want to hop on a video chat like we have here, or a GoToMeeting, screen share, WebEx, all these technologies that are out there make that possible. Of course, there's email too. So in terms of where we spend our day and collaborating, it's around Slack. It's a chat program called Slack, which many of you know or maybe use. There's Microsoft Teams. There's other chat applications as well. But we have different channels in that virtual world where we can, we have one area where we just talk about random water cooler things. So we take time to collaborate with each other over non-work things. So we might spend 10, 15 minutes talking about nothing and everything, right? So this morning we were talking about what we eat, diet trends and things. But that was a neat, it's a little connection we're making with each other. And we have these connection points throughout the week, and that goes on every week and so on. Of course, for more the meat of what we're doing, we have channels for every customer we work with, so we can focus conversations there and collaborate there. And then we have channels for any other internal project we may be working on. So collaboration is it's around the chat program in our organization, and then it builds from there. So as soon as we realize if we're typing too much, we'll literally say, hey, we're typing way too much, let's get on the phone. And then it transitions into that other form of collaboration. I'll say, do I have one more minute, Norm? You're gonna cut me off? Good, okay. I'll say one hack that we use, and we're pretty aggressive at this, is creating quick videos and sending it to people. So what you'll find is that, this goes with any communication, not just remote, but you maybe find yourself hammering out an email, and that might take 30 minutes to write an email to explain something. But at the same time, you might not want to hop on a call with them, because that call, there's overhead with getting that scheduled. There's overhead with everybody hopping on a call at once. So we've gotten into this habit of making videos that demonstrate what we're showing people. So if we can show them what we're doing in our software instead of getting on a screen share with them, make a video 3 or 5 minutes long, share it with them, and then they can see it that saves everybody a lot of time versus, again, writing that long email or hopping on a meeting. So those are some of the ways we collaborate inside and outside.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'll turn over to Brandon to answer the question.
Yeah, so I want to focus on 3 different areas. So our principles: vision, freedom, and touch points. So by vision, what I mean is, if you're leading a distributed team, you want to try and create a vision of where you're going. You don't want a prescriptive model. You're looking for an aspirational vision for where you're going, so that you're all rowing to the same point. But it's not, again, prescriptive where it's boxing in your performers. And so we're always striving for that. And it actually feeds that second point, which is freedom. I mean, with aspirational vision, when I'm in uniform, I'd be talking about this, I'd call it commander's intent. It's the objective, it's where we're going and where we all have to be striving for. The freedom really comes into allowing your team, especially in this distributed world, to operate the way that is most productive for them. They have to make calls on the ground with what they're facing at all times. And they can't be thinking of whether or not you're second guessing them. They have to be guided by the vision that you crafted for them. And then they need the freedom of maneuver and agility in the space, right? So, for us, we call that decentralized execution. We need to empower our folks to all perform at their max and make the decisions they need to in that space. And then that comes to the third. You can't just create a vision and think everyone's going to row in the right direction based on what you said. This touch points, it's really about turning monologue to dialogue. And I use that term often. What I'm trying to do is force the other team members to communicate what they're hearing and what their objectives are about where we're going. And that's the only way that I know we're either apart or we're actually seeing a similar vision. And so sometimes, it's just that verbal, I'll give some intent, I'll give some vision, and then I'm looking for them to come back to me maybe in the next session. But I want them to prompt it. I want them to talk about it from their point of view, because then I can see where the disparities are or where the commonality is. But sometimes it's like what Chris was saying. I have to get us to, actually look at the same thing at the same time, so we're not talking past each other. So sometimes I've got to create visuals that prompt that dialogue. We just did it earlier when we were talking about our decision of a virtual event versus a live event. And whenever you break that down and the complexity gets harder, if you're just communicating even like this, I might be saying something very clearly, but the point of communication is what goes in the other person's ear, right? And you've got to make sure that you can narrow down into, okay, we're going to go deep into this one area and make sure that we're not fluttering around everywhere else. And you need those visual tools that help generate that dialogue.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Communication always seems to be one of the biggest components of working virtually. How do you effectively communicate? And that turning monologue to dialogue, I think, resonates really well within that context. So next, I'll turn it over to Sean to answer the same question.
Sure. So before I do, I'd just like to say that, and I'm sure Norm, you would agree, that having worked with Brandon, those 3 tenets that he just said absolutely hold true, and it's working effectively, I think, in field ops. I think you'd agree, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so recall that my situation is a little unique in terms of my colleagues all just started working remotely, and I'm uniquely positioned to help them out. So when it came to making collaboration work, let's just say that we had a lot of opportunity for growth, I think is the right way to put it. And so I embraced that, and I met with our CEO. He's a new CEO, 6 months now. He's been with our company. And I basically said, I want to establish a remote work objective statement that talks about, from our corporate perspective, what's our goals for our remote workers. And as you might guess, it's basically, it centers around experiencing our culture irrespective of where you're physically located, and supporting the remote workers to the greatest extent so they can be very productive. I accompanied that objective statement with some best practices, both from the corporate perspective, what the company can be doing, and the individual. And I'm getting that out to the rest of our employees. Some highlights are, for the corporate perspective, emphasize the work done by your remote workers, especially if it's not like readily visible by the other employees. Keep remote employees in mind on new projects and additional responsibilities. Sometimes that doesn't happen effectively. And from the employees working up, realize that the remote workers themselves, obstacles that you attribute to physical location can often be overcome with additional communication. So just talk it out. It's not that you weren't there at the meeting, it's that you need to follow up and make sure that there's clear understanding and good communication all around. So that's what I'm basically doing, is that objective statement and best practices. Because I had to fix the whole system. The whole system was effectively broken. And there's an opportunity now with the pandemic to be able to help people to embrace these best practices.
Great, thanks, Sean. Now I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Yeah, so again, how do we make it work internally and externally? Well, we've got a few things in our group that require a lot of collaboration, a lot of eyes. Just use a couple of examples. One of them is we're monitoring ocean vessels that are coming into the U.S. from various locations. And so, and another thing we have going on right now is a bid. We have an active bid going on for one of our transportation sections that we manage. And what we found very helpful are these tools. So going back to what Chris said earlier around Slack and Microsoft Teams, we use Microsoft Teams. It's been great in terms of sharing data, sharing files, to have an Excel file that you can update live and you can actually see who is in that file and what updates they're making live and in real time. That's very helpful when you're analyzing, whether it's rates for a bid or how much you want to allocate to a certain carrier or whatnot. But also, when we're manually tracking an ocean vessel and we're looking at, an ETA to a port, and those things change daily. And so if you have the right people with eyes and visibility into that spreadsheet at all times through a tool like Microsoft Teams, it's much more beneficial than email. I think the natural thing when people are working remotely and working from home, it's to send an email for every question you may have. It may even be over-communicate via email so your boss thinks you're working. And we got to get away from that mindset, right? So I'm finding that it's these tools like a Microsoft Teams or a Slack that are very helpful. And the other nice thing about them is you can invite external parties to that. So we are inviting our carriers. We're inviting, you know, teams from other parts of the organization that we don't normally meet with as often in person, but they're able to see the work that we're doing. We're able to share information in a very live and real, tangible way. And you can do all the video and you know, instant messaging communication there that you need to do as well. So I think that's how we're making it work.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, you know, some of your comments really resonated with some of the topics we talked about last week in last week's webinar about culture and a culture of accountability, holding each other, you know, self-accountable, holding each other accountable. And, you know, we feel that, you know, there's a lot of times when you feel almost isolated in your own space. And, you know, that's where sometimes over communicating might come out, because there's this, you know, perceived lack of trust perhaps, and lack of accountability. So that really plays into some of the culture discussion that we had last week. So great answers. And it's really great to see this mix of functions that we have for these different organizations. So now we're going to turn it over to our questions from all of our participants. And right now we have 7 questions. Keep adding those questions, keep voting for the questions that you'd like to hear answered. And let's see, we will start with the first one here. And this is from Ken, I'm not going to get your last name correct, Ken Winiger, I believe. And the question is, how do you deal with the limits of the Department of Defense, and in particular, the Marine Corps information technology capabilities in regards to working virtually with government partners? And so I'm actually going to ask Brandon to address this first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sean and Aaron, if you want to pipe up, you know, from a non-DoD standpoint. I know you.
I was going to say, I don't know if I'm the right one for that, but maybe.
So we'll ask Brandon to answer this one first. Over to you, Brandon.
I would start with don't ask for permission. You know, so you need to be able to operate and meet an objective. And while everyone else is getting used to how you do that outside of the typical work environment and on maybe sometimes atypical networks or systems, as long as you're policing yourself, you know, their ability to slap your wrist later for how you're going about doing it. I do have the benefit, you know, my program, I intentionally don't touch because of this very reason. I don't touch, you know, secret or even sensitive. You know, I try and maintain so I can have the flexibility to talk equally with industry folks and other agencies, as well as like those in the Marine Corps about a program. And so it's because we don't want to be hamstrung. And my job is to build that bridge between, you know, commercial technology and ourselves, and recognizing, you know, we, the bureaucracy, have to get beyond ourselves to make that happen. You know, the commercial market is not sitting there waiting and begging us to come in, right? Because they've already dismissed us to a great degree because of our bureaucracy. And so, you know, I do have a lot of freedom in how I can do that. But personally, I toggle between, you know, I'm on my personal Mac right now, so I can get on these video conferences. But then I'll hop on my work computer to get on email. And so just the flexibility of being able to kind of dynamically respond that way and policing yourself, I think that is the key.
Sean, do you want to take a stab at answering this one too?
Sure. My answer is going to be rather unique, though, in that it does present, the IT capabilities do present a real challenge. And, you know, I'm a big believer in in-person sort of discussions. It's something that has worked effectively for me. So the way that I handle the IT challenges is I get in a plane and I fly to Northern Virginia and meet in person. And a lot of that is because some of the work that I do is in the classified space. And so I'll work closely with my team, you know, having sort of like, you know, talking around the subject, having on-class discussions, fly in, spend a couple days in the vault, and then go in and present the final material to the client in person. Just because, again, a lot of the stuff that I do is classified. And I would say the only thing I really hold is like IPRs. I'll occasionally hold an IPR, just an update that doesn't get into the actual analysis itself, but provides sort of a programmatic update. I'll do that using, whatever feature they're comfortable with, Skype, etc. Yeah, it's a big challenge. So I fly there.
Excellent. We have another question. This is from Anonymous, which is great. It's a little mysterious. What tips do you have for building rapport with new virtual contacts? So looking at new virtual contacts, that you've established, what tips do you have for building rapport? And I'll turn it over to Chris Rietter to answer this first.
Yeah, that's not easy, as you can imagine. It's all virtual. You typically in a normal engagement, you could see this person across the table or go to lunch or get a coffee. But for virtual, of course, doing what we're doing now with the video chat is ideal. So you can look at each other's faces, see their expressions, understand what's not getting them excited versus what's engages them. But other than that, I try to, when I initially do a business call, I try to spend a good solid, for the first time I talk to someone, spend a solid 10 or 15 minutes just getting to know them and, having some easy discussion points around the weather and where they live and just getting to know them a little bit. And those 10 minutes are really valuable because there's really, in a virtual space, there's not many other ways to get that rapport built very quickly. So good old fashioned talking on the phone or talking on a video chat like this is how I'd answer that question.
Great. Ask Aaron. Aaron, do you want to answer this question?
Well, I think I'd answer very similar to how Chris did. And I think video helps a lot. I mean, I don't think that there's any true replacement for meeting in person. I think that'll always be important. We're always going to have travel and fly halfway across the world to meet with people to form quality business relationships. But I do think that the video helps, and you just have to be genuine. People see through that. I think, we're all the same. We all can tell if someone's being real with us. So I do think that the video helps, but just constant engagement and showing sympathy. I think those are just key things in any relationship or any type of communication that help build trust and rapport with contacts, whether it's in person or virtually.
So Norm, I'd like to just pile on that. Just a quick little lesson that I learned is that a lot of times when you first meet somebody, it's in a team setting, right? You meet them, they're a member of a team. And I found that connecting to the, have the team meetings, but talk to the individuals also and sort of find out what their concerns are, what are their expectations, et cetera. And then when you really do that, you're connecting with each member of the team individually instead of them as a group.
And I just rounded out and, just putting it in a different way. Human nature is still human nature, right? I mean, people are driven by personal interests and organizational interests. And so when you actually see them, for who they are in those two categories, and then recognize like why you aren't trying to get something out of them, but why you're trying to create benefit for them and yourself as you align those, they sense that, right? They can tell because you're meeting them where they are, and you're paying attention to who they are. And then you're operating accordingly, right? Like how they are successful or what they're going for. And you can't replace that when they know that there's commonality between their pursuits and your pursuit. That gives them some of that autonomy. I mean, even in my world, I tend to say all the people that work with me and all these different programs, if you were to simplify it, in some ways they become my BD folks for my program because they see how they are benefiting organizationally and personally, and they can take it places that I'm not, and those in the Marine Corps are not, and they can promote those same visions. So those common visions that we share and approaches and philosophies. So I think to me, it remains about human nature. We just have to, connect a little differently in this forum.
Yeah, excellent answers and to a great question. I'd say from CANA's perspective, adding on to all the great answers, for us working virtually, that individual human-to-human contact, that ability to meet with someone on site, like what Sean was saying and what Brandon was saying, is really important to us as well. What we find is that because we do work virtually and we do a lot over video, because we get that face-to-face connection, we call it two-dimensional connection. Having that face-to-face, those discussions, those meetings are really important, especially as Chris mentioned, for establishing new relationships. One of the things we find, and I think might work well within this new environment that we're in, where we can only meet in two-dimensional space over video, is it's good sometimes just to have sessions where you can get together with the group to brainstorm ideas, or to, so we get into this tempo and this operational tempo where we have meetings every week, or meetings for technical purpose, for analysis, or for talking about things. But there's times when you can just kind of, if you can reserve some time with video and get the group together and back out a little bit and say, hey guys, where are we going? What stories do we want to tell as part of this work? What other areas, and have a free flow conversation. There's a lot of goodness comes out of that, and you can help connect again or reconnect. Or if it's a new partner, a brainstorming session is a great way to kind of start getting in sync with understanding where they're going, what's driving them. So I'd say that there's nothing that substitutes the human-to-human three-dimensional connection. Even in this environment, I think it's worthwhile every now and then to pause, get people together on the video, and kind of have those sessions as well. So that's one of the tips that I'd call out. Great. Well, we have a lot of great questions still coming in, and we have over 15 minutes left, so we have plenty of time. So thanks for doing that. Our next question is going to focus on organizational culture. So how does your organizational culture support or take away from your team's ability to work virtually? So this gets to one of the polling questions that some of you have answered in our audience list of, are you part of a traditional organization that works all on site? Do you work all virtually, or does your organization have a hybrid approach? So once again, this question is, how does your organizational culture support or take away from your team's ability to work virtually? So I'll just leave it up to whoever wants to answer first. Go ahead.
I can offer challenges, and then someone else can come in with a solution. A big part of Group W culture is what we call hiving, which a way to describe that could be, business gossip, right? So sitting around the water cooler or coffee maker, and, did you hear both, and this is both good and bad, right? So did you hear that such and such is having a real challenge with their project because they really need this type of talent? Oh, well, great. I happen to know that Steve over here has that talent, or what, and so both good and bad. And especially when it comes also to business development, we rely on intentional serendipity. Like, we don't have a BD shop. So it's you hear something from a colleague and a friend, in an informal setting, and it's all centered on physical location. And so it's me doing this whole lone wolf thing for a while. It's been a real challenge. And what I'm learning now is both to rely more on video, like we're talking about here, regular discussions with groups, regular discussions with individuals, being consistent about it, and trying to lighten it up too. So that this extends a little bit beyond, it's the fact that a lot of people are uncomfortable with the video chat. And so I find that lightening it up seems to help. So I talked about that town hall meeting we're going to have. We're thinking about making it sort of like a happy hour kind of thing too, just to like lighten the air a little bit so people feel more free to talk. So yeah, in summary, the challenge for me has been our culture is centered on physical location and face-to-face interactions. So hopefully someone has some really good solutions then.
Who wants to take the next swing? Aaron?
I could talk. I don't know if I necessarily have a solution, but I guess the question about how a company's culture, impacts it. Well, every business is different. Every company has, different financial considerations. So for instance, some companies may not have the ability for all employees in their company to have a laptop or something that they can take home and work remotely from. And other companies are purely virtual. They all work from a laptop. They come in, they plug their laptop into a desktop, and that's how they operate. So it's very easy for those companies that have those pieces of technology for their employees available to work remotely. But I do think that there's this whole stigma around working from home, specifically in corporate America, and that people aren't going to do work. They're not going to get the job done. They're just going to goof off the whole time. They're going to be at happy hour with their friends at 3 o'clock. And I just don't, I don't find that that's the case. And I think we need to give our employees a little bit more credit. We need to give ourselves a little bit more credit. I mean, I bet if we did a poll right here of everybody on the call, a majority of us would probably say we're working more hours. You know, I think we get to work sooner in the morning because we don't have to commute. We're not watching the clock as much because no one's around, or we don't have that, you know, specific lunchtime that we have to get to with a group of people. So, you know, I think it's, you know, there's a lot of paranoia, I guess I'd call it, in a lot of managers and a lot of companies, and we just need to get over it. I mean, that's my message. And I'm hoping that this whole thing is, you know, as unfortunate as it is, and we all don't want to be in this position, but I think it's going to make people think again about it. And you'll find you're able to get things done just as well as you were in the office. And yes, there's some challenges. There's pros and cons to everything in life, but we're getting through it. And so I just think, yeah, it is a cultural thing, and companies have to get used to it. And once they try it, they'll be used to it.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. You know, one of the techniques that we use at CANA, and this is kind of related to what Chris had mentioned earlier, using Slack. So we use Google Chat as our internal chat medium, and we find that having that chat function that's accessible to all the employees, all the team members, you know, allows, you know, everybody to participate. And we also have a water cooler chat thread, which is open to everybody in the organization. And in that way, it's really interesting because not just you know, Bob and Susie around the water cooler, it's you broadcasting to everybody in the company. But it's really interesting because you can get some ideas out there and start a dialogue, a conversation around it. And it's really neat to see those chat threads develop, you know, as people, you know, jump in and talk. And so it's a great way for us to informally communicate instead of adding just another email. And also, you know, a great and easy way for people to respond. So I really am a big fan of that, the chat threads, the chat rooms, you know, organizing your content there. And the other thing is, I was going to say is, you know, organizing a virtual happy hour. I mean, we've done that a couple times within our company. Twice a year we get together as a company. We do what we call an offsite, which for us is really almost an onsite because we're seeing everybody in 3D, right? And this year that just happened to be right after this pandemic was ramping up. And so we had to cancel that, but we had it anyway. We had a 2-day session where we were able to take a break from everything else and focus on ourselves as a team. And it's a great way to just reassess where we are as a virtual team, how are we performing, and then talk through some different brainstorming ideas that people had for things we can do within either our work or our CANA Foundation, IRAD, other things. So that's another thing I'd welcome. And part of it is culture and getting people comfortable that, you know, they can trust others, that they're not gonna, you know, jump on an idea and totally bash it, but contribute to it. So, okay, if you guys are ready, let's move on to another question here. So let's see. So this is a follow-on question to the culture question. So what unique cultural challenges do you find in a partially distributed team versus in a fully remote team? So, you know, what are some of the unique cultural challenges that you're seeing now that you may have seen before, but you might also be seeing now that everybody's working remotely? What are some of those challenges that you feel like you have to help overcome? Looks like Brandon's taking himself off mute, so we'll start with him.
Yeah, so I think, you know, to me, this comes back to human nature. You know, we are condition based, right? And a lot of our colleagues and our subordinates, they have been conditioned by working in proximity. You know, I say people are driven by aha moments and oh shit moments. And that proximity generates a lot of oh shit moments for them, right? Because their boss is looking, you know they have a visual reminder or you know, that fear factor about, you know, their performance. And that's how they've operated, and they've been conditioned by that. And some of them won't transition well, right? And so how do we reach in and help them? and so when we can recognize that they're that type of person, it's not, I don't believe as they come home, they're not looking to freeload. They want to be productive, but they might not be able to get past themselves, right? And so how can you help them by generating, again, touch points that gives that, not like I'm looking over your shoulder, but in a dialogue form, right? They're having to communicate back to you about what they're doing and how they're doing it. Really, because you're not trying to hold them accountable. You're trying to make sure they're not stopped by some barrier, right? They came to a barrier. Normally they turn to the cubicle over, or they'd come to you as the boss and they say, but now it's harder for them to do that, and they just let it pass. And inside they don't like that. They want to be effective, but they don't know how to overcome it. So sometimes you have to reach down into, or across the aisle, right? Reach to them, recognizing the type of person they are and their own internal challenges of how they're dealing with this new environment.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Anybody else want to address any cultural challenges that you're seeing in working fully remote or partially remote?
Well, I'll jump on. Aaron had talked about this stigma, and certainly that's something that I've had to deal with and been working with our corporate leadership to sort of quell the resentment that some people feel towards remote workers up until this, sort of tragedy here with the pandemic. And it's funny because, now I'm hearing from the people who, I had to talk with a colleague a couple of years ago when I first started this and saying, the number one thing I hear from you is, well, you weren't there, referencing some meeting. And I had to deal with that and finally confront him with it. And guess who's calling me now saying, wow, I realize being on the other side of this whole thing, just how difficult it can be and how hard you must have had to have worked to be able to contribute in the at the volume that you did or in the magnitude that you did. So again, there's whenever there's a tragedy or challenge, there's always opportunity. And so I'm using this, sad time, if you will, to address the challenges that I've been facing over the last couple of years with the multiple efforts that I talked about executing right now.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Okay, I'm going to ask another question. This is from Brady. Brady, thanks for asking a couple questions here. The question I'm going to focus on is, how difficult has it been to communicate with blank representatives? He says government representatives. So how difficult has it been communicating with government representatives or anybody that typically are not working from home and who now are working remotely? So I guess I'll turn that over to Brandon or Sean to answer first.
I mentioned earlier, I like to give, everyone the freedom to do it their way as they can be most effective, but that's not always productive, or it aligns our view of how things are going to unfold, right? So I have to use no later thans a lot, and even if it feels artificial, even though I might not have a deadline that actually needs to happen with that person, I find that if you use a no later than with them, just so they have a barometer for themselves, and you are both on the same page as to when you might get that answer or get that work done, it's good. And that's hard for me because, I do feel like it's an artificial thing to use. But again, getting back to what's going to help them and then align us into, the timelines rather than creating this friction point of different expectations or unknowns.
I'd ask Aaron, do you have anything to add to that? I know not focusing on government, but any representative that typically is used to working in the office and now has to work remotely, how are you working around issues with communication with them?
I can't say I'm having a ton of those. I think everyone seems to be adapting fairly well. I'll kind of wrap this into one of the other questions, and sorry if I'm doing that, but there was a question around what's the biggest technical hurdle you've had to deal with. So I think some people are better at communicating over this virtual means than others. And, it's not just a generational thing. I think it's also just people who have had experience with it. So for instance, all these video platforms, they work pretty well now. They're pretty stable. They're not what they were 5-6 years ago, where they were constantly going in and out, videos, splattering all around. But the one challenge has been sound. And so, we're all working on different types of computers. Not everyone's computer, mine is one of these, that doesn't have the greatest speaker or microphone built into it. And so, you get a lot of these calls going and people are standing, 4 or 5 feet away from their computer talking into it. And you can barely understand what they're saying. And so, my biggest thing has just been knowing what you sound like, talk to people, test this stuff out, get a headset if you need it. I love my little Apple EarPods, shameless plug for Apple there. But you see Chris has a headset on there as well. And everyone else is talking into their computer, but they have very good computer speakers. You can tell by the clarity in their voices on this. So I think that is the biggest challenge is you gotta make sure you're getting your message across, and we can't have these problems virtually just because our computer speakers aren't working properly, or just because, we decide we want to stand 6 feet away from our computer and nobody can hear us talking. So I think that's been the bigger challenge. I've been able to get in contact and have the same discussions that I had when I was in the office, virtually no more difficult than I had prior. So, yeah, again, sorry to dive that into another question there, but I felt it was related.
That's great, Aaron. Thank you. And just to add just a little bit to that, and then we'll get into our final observations by our panelists, and we'll have about 30 seconds each to talk through it. But as you're preparing your comments, I just want to add to it. Now is a really great opportunity for everybody to really work on their communication in these type of forums, right? Into a video, into screen sharing, into figuring out what works. And so, my experience is that the more reps that you get in, the more repetitions that you get in using these type of environments, getting yourself into a video environment, doing screen sharing, how do you effectively use chat alongside of a conference or a meeting? The more you can do that, the better you're going to get at it. And we're at a really good point now because there's a lot of newbies, right? There's a lot of people still fumbling around. So if you're fumbling around, it's not that big of a deal. So I'd really encourage everybody to try to use these tools, and really that's going to help you over time. And Walt DeGrange had a great post in our latest blog post newsletter about this is, hey, just get to work and start using it and you'll figure it out. And don't be afraid to jump in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists for their final comments. So if you guys could spend maybe 20, 30 seconds giving your comments. I'm going to start with Chris Rietter.
All right. Great. Again, well, thanks again, Norm, and CANA for having recon insight on this panel discussion. It was really valuable, and I'm getting a lot of good tips. I will say that, we've kind of touched upon this. Aaron kind of mentioned it about, how much people really do work at home. And what we found, and probably a lot of people on this panel, maybe even on in the attendee list have found, is that you actually work a little too much. So my wife and I started working home together a couple weeks ago, and we found we rolled out of bed at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And for the first week, we walked away at 7 or 8 at night. So having those boundaries, making sure that the chat is shut down at a certain time of the day, and making sure that you leave the office, whether it's your dining room or table or an actual office in your building, in your house. Make sure we need to set up boundaries, and that's a constant problem with kind of anybody working from home, because they're really most likely working a lot more than they should versus, worrying about them working less than they should. So.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'll turn over to Brandon for your comments, Brandon.
Yeah, I just want to thank CANA and Norm for putting this on. What I've learned, I've had to learn the hard way about how to be effective in this type of environment. And now we're watching everyone having to learn that, at the same time. And so it's key to have folks like CANA that have really, wrestled this beast and know how to do it very well, to bring us all up collectively, and then bringing in their partners to help communicate, And my hope long-term is that we recognize, in many ways, how much more productive we are when we have the freedom in each organization to work this way when it can be done. And some of the bureaucracy and the inefficiencies of the office life are no longer just the status quo of what we've always done. So CANA helping everyone do it effectively is the key to that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I'll turn over to Sean.
Great. Okay, so as everyone said, thanks for the opportunity. I'll just a quick observation. I was kind of taken aback in a good way by the amount of how much we address the human factors here, the human side of this whole thing. And It's like, hey, just be a good human and be good to the other humans, right? And that goes from everything from making sure that you identify and address, proactively address communication gaps, because that's an important part of what being a human is. Even to Aaron's point about the sound, making sure that you're able to effectively communicate your thoughts, etc., from a technical perspective and everything, because that's all just part of this, being a good human being thing. And I think that we're observing a unique time in human history where a lot of these things are sort of the challenges are exacerbated. So there's real opportunity there to start to identify how we can do this stuff better. And I think that we've sort of touched on this. We keep hearing about how things are permanently changed. And I think, in some degree they will be. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Aaron, turn it over to you.
No, so just adding to what Chris said, establish a schedule. Don't work too many hours, and don't forget about your mental and physical health. Get outside and walk around. The worst thing you can do is stay sedentary. Eat healthy. Get outside. Get some exercise. Again, we don't want to just wake up, sit at our desk, and then go to sleep. You got to get outside. Even with these lockdown, restrictions in place, you're still allowed to get out, take a walk, and get some exercise in most places that I think we all live. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And it was great to listen to the feedback from all the panelists.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. And thanks again for our panelists. Once again, I appreciate your time. For participants, attendees, you can find more information on our CANA website, on our CANA Connection. There's ways to engage us and ask us if we didn't answer your questions yet. Go ahead and ask those there. We will also follow up with the questions that we're seeing on the Q&A thread. So feel free to contact us. And please join us next week. Next week, we have a third part of our webinar series. We're going to be focusing on parenting, caregiving, and remote work. So for those that are having challenges where you're now working at home with your kids or you're a primary caregiver, how are you wrestling with those challenges? So join us next week at the same time for that. Remember, analyze, assess, execute. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you.